Hello and welcome to Designer's Voice, audio conversations on design which inform, challenge and inspire. I'm Alice Bryan, a furniture designer and editor with over 20 years experience in design. And the one thing that I know for certain is that to have the opportunity to learn from those around us is a joy and a privilege. So today, my role will be to guide and nudge along the conversation so that we can eavesdrop together. And I am delighted that my guests today are Paula Day, founder of the Robin and Lucienne Day Foundation, and Corin Mellor, creative director at David Mellor, who will be discussing their roles as custodians of their parents' iconic designs. But before I hand over to Paula and Corin, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about my guests. Paula Day is the only child of furniture designer Robin Day and textiles designer Lucienne Day, both pioneers of modern design for over 7 decades and 2 of my personal design heroes. Each deserve design hero status, predominantly because they designed with a core aim to improve people's lives through the designs they buy for their homes, but also because they are each independently fearless in their approach to new materials, forms and techniques. Paula is a writer, poet and garden designer with a Cambridge degree and a doctorate in English literature. I've had the pleasure to hear Paula speak many times about her parents' work, which is part of her role as founder of the Robin and Lucienne Day Foundation, a design education charity launched in 2012. Public speaking is something Paula does regularly alongside events and exhibitions. And here I have to note 2 events. Robin Day Works in Wood, an exhibition in 2015 at the V&A Museum, which celebrated the centenary of Robin's birth. And just 2 years later, to celebrate the centenary of Lucienne's birth, the Arts University Bournemouth exhibition, Lucienne Day Living Design. Paula lives in Cumbria, where for many years she ran her own business pioneering mountain walking holidays for women, a passion which I suspect is in her genes. Corin Mellor is the son of David Mellor, one of Britain's best-known cutlery designers with an expertise in good design which will endure, including his iconic traffic light and bus shelter designs. Corin's mother, Fiona McCarthy, was an extremely well-regarded biographer and cultural historian whose own interest in design permeated her work with publications including Walter Gropius, visionary founder of the Bauhaus, William Morris, A Life for Our Time, and All Things Bright and Beautiful, British Design, 1830 to Today. Now here I must share that I was born in Sheffield, the Steel City, and grew up learning about my city's heritage in steel and cutlery. It's perhaps not surprising that I have always felt drawn to David's good, everyday design, and that he was the person I chose to interview back in 2001 for my BA. It was an honour to meet him and to tour his Hathersage factory together, which is just a stone's throw from where we're sat here today recording. Corin studied product design at Kingston University before working for London-based architects York, Rosenberg and Mardell. He joined his father in the family business and took the lead in 2002 when his father retired. Corin's passion for design is evident in every detail of his home, possessions and attire. He's followed his father's design ethos, which was perhaps inevitable as he says work and life have always happened in the same space. Perhaps, Corin and Paula, your conversation could begin by telling me a little bit about the relationship that your parents had within the design community.
Shall I start? I mean, they were good friends. My father particularly perhaps through Royal Designers for Industry, or both my parents through Royal Designers for Industry.
Yes.
And also, of course, being interviewed by your mother, they enormously rated and valued her design journalism. And in fact, they asked her to write, I think perhaps many, many years in advance, their obituaries for the Guardian. So when they died, actually, it was your mother's words.
I always find this sort of pre-writing obituaries rather unusual. As my mother often used to be up in the log cabin, which is about 100 yards in that direction, writing someone's obituary, and I know she felt quite uneasy about actually writing about someone who was very much alive.
Yeah.
And yeah.
But I think it was reassuring for them, because they knew that, she knew, and she
perhaps
would
that's
represent
it.
them truly.
Yeah, perhaps that's it.
Yeah.
And I suppose it seems more fitting to write about someone you actually are still friends with.
Absolutely. And then Fiona, your mother, very kindly agreed to become the patron of the Robin and Lucienne Day Foundation, one of the patrons when we set up, and was enormously kind and supportive to me. So I was very, very sad to hear of her death in 2020.
So what date was that?
I set up, my parents died in 2010.
Yeah.
They both died in the same year. And I set up the foundation in 2012.
Gosh, so quite soon after. And was that a sort of mission for you? Did you feel it's something you should do?
It was, but very unexpected. I mean, I didn't expect to have any, strangely enough, engagement or responsibility for their work. And they certainly didn't expect that of me. But what happened was, it had been happening in their last years, but even more so when they died, I became aware that there was copies of their work. Their names were being used to sell really travesties of their designs.
I see. So
very rapidly, really, I registered that this was just something that I couldn't accept. It was really being parasitic on their life work, on both my parents' life work. And I had to, in retrospect, it's very rapidly, begin to take action with very little knowledge of how to do that, and realize that what I really cared about was that people would know what they'd done in their lives. So actually, it was an educational mission, really. And on that basis, I set up a charity, the Robin and Lucienne Day Foundation, and our core objective is to educate about Robin and Lucienne Day's design legacies. So that's really the heart of our work as a charity.
And what do you think might have happened if you hadn't stepped in?
I think there would have been more and more misrepresentations of their work. And the other side of that, the other part of the mission, which is happily really the priority now, is licensing their designs for authentic production to suitable licensees.
So for you, that's been quite a sort of whole change in your life, hasn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely huge. Yeah.
But Corin, your journey to being the custodian of your father's work was much smoother than that, wasn't it?
Yeah, I suppose I've never had the sort of, the thought of sort of seeing my father's designs all sort of streaming out all over the world in sort of bastardized form has never really happened. So I haven't really had to sort of step in that way. I've very much been sort of involved, I suppose, in the whole David Mellor organisation since I was sort of 2, and I used to, as a boy, go down to the other end of the house where the sort of prototyping workshop was and play on the lathe. Well, perhaps not at 2, but so I've sort of always just been immersed in this whole sort of designing, making sort of area. So for me, it was sort of it's what I just like to do. I used to like to create things and make things, and I sort of did that alongside my father. And then when he was not able to continue, I just carried on doing the same thing. Keep on trucking.
There's a wonderful continuity. There's a wonderful family continuity for you. And I mean, that goes along with, as I see it, the fact that your father not only designed products, but he actually, ran the company that made them. And then that retailed them. And that is entirely different.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it is quite, what we do is I think quite special in that we design things, we make things, and then we retail things. But there's a reason for that, and it's so that you've got absolute control on the design and the quality.
Yes.
And if anything's not right in any of those stages, you've only got yourself to blame.
Yes.
Having said that, it is quite hard work because you've got so many different hats to wear to actually sort of achieve that. But I still love the concept of sort of coming up with an idea, and then I love the idea of actually someone being given it in a David Mellor bag at the other end. I mean, to me, it's the whole process apart from, and I suppose it's the ownership of that design and looking after it all the way through, and then finally actually giving it to someone to hopefully last a long time.
And that's the way your father worked.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. Whereas my parents, not at all. I mean, they designed for clients, client companies. And I mean, they were both extremely fortunate in having their major
good
long-term clients being excellent clients. But of course, companies change. And in the case of both my parents' most important clients, the companies changed hands, and the whole identity and the whole culture of those companies changed.
So what happened to the actual products that were being manufactured at the time of change?
Well, I mean, in the case of textiles, they just tend to be, only produced for a short time anyway. But in terms of furniture, I mean, there was this, extremely sad. My father's close relationship with the Hilly family firm, which was absolutely key to both to Hilly and to Robin Day. Very, very fruitful collaboration. Then the Hilly family sold the company in 1983. And really then fashions changed and my father's work mostly went out of production. I mean, he continued to do some important public seating. But, So
it was more that it went out of production rather than the production actually going wrong?
Both. I mean, both. But most designs went out of production
Paula,
altogether.
I think many of Lucienne's surface pattern designs are some of the work that she's the most well known for. But with her mosaic designs, did she design and manage the manufacture and the sales of those?
You mean the silk mosaics?
Yeah, the silk mosaics.
So, I mean, that was entirely different. In the late 1970s, I mean, she'd been designing for industry for, 30 years by then. And she decided to change direction completely and started, in a sense, a second career in craft, in handmade craft works, one-off wall hangings, which she called silk mosaics. Which, her assistants produced in her workshop. But I mean, that's very different because they were one-off pieces. That's very different from your family's,
There's
factory.
similarities, aren't there? There's,
similarities to some extent.
Yeah, but volume-wise, I suppose it's quite different.
They were one-off pieces. I mean, it was really a craft career, a craft production method, I mean, I think I'm imagining that, as you say, to have complete control of the whole process from design through to manufacture through to retail is enviable and wonderful. I can also imagine that it has its own challenges.
Fraught with problems. Yes,
sure
well, I suppose it's that juggling all the different roles.
Yeah,
it's sort of constantly. Right. Okay. Well, I'm in charge of the shop side and how nice they are to customers, and then on the other hand, you're worrying about the quality of the steel coming into the factory, and the press is needing some major work doing. So you're sort of, but I quite like that in a way. No day is the same. And I find that quite a challenge. But I enjoy the challenge of it. I suppose the other in the last sort of perhaps 15 years, what I have done, which is slightly outside the remit that my father had, I would say, was I've started designing things that we don't make because we're not glass blowers or we're not ceramics people. And I found that incredibly interesting. But then there's another problem, which is actually it's not your own factory, it's someone else's factory or workshop, and trying to actually get the product you've designed out to where you haven't actually got quite as much control. I found that quite enjoyable, but also it's constantly challenging.
Have you moved in that direction because that's something that you have felt passionate about as a designer, or is it something that you felt was right for the brand and the business?
Both, I think. I always I don't know if it was. I think it was my father's philosophy as well. Is that really a good design of cutlery? Well, a good design full stop should be able to stand the test of time. So therefore, you've sort of slightly dug yourself a bit of a hole because you can't actually do new designs of cutlery every year, nor would you want to. So I don't really like the idea of discontinuing anything. So everything stays, everything that is designed carries on. So therefore, there's a limit to how much cutlery design I can do. So therefore, I've sort of thought of, well, what else can I design? So that has sort of been really exciting because I've been able to sort of, in effect, I look around the shop and I think, well, yeah, let's design glassware, let's design woodware, and I've really enjoyed that, and I've really enjoyed sort of really going all around the world trying to find the best makers I can find. So there's two reasons.
When was the last new cutlery collection launched, and when will the next one be?
I launched Chelsea, which is really the only design. There are quite a few designs I've sort of worked on with my father. So the pair of us, I suppose, really designed it. Or perhaps I was actually just working as the prototyper, filing away to my dad's instructions. Can't quite remember. But Chelsea was one that I actually did totally, and that's perhaps about 6 years old. And then we've got a new design which is coming out this year as well.
That's exciting.
So yeah, so it's not often. I've got quite involved with knives. I love designing knives. That's been a nice little sidetrack. So I just love creating things and doing new things.
Do you feel a lot of responsibility for the legacy of your dad's work?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's why I'm sort of bothered about all the details and what polish we use and exactly the positioning of the branding. So yes, I do. I sort of think that the designs need to be well represented in terms of quality and manufacture, and I'm sure that's exactly the same as I mean, almost the horror of actually seeing something that is sort of in production but bastardized is awful. That would haunt me, and I'm sure that was the same with you. Hence, you setting up the foundation.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to hear you talk. I mean, earlier you were saying that nearly all your father's cutlery designs were still in production.
Yeah.
Which I find, sort of a mind-blowing possibility, because I reckon that perhaps I probably not 10% of my father's furniture or my mother's textiles are in production. And, one of my dreams really is to see more and more of
everything.
Everything would practically fill. I reckon. I mean, my father designed, perhaps 150 pieces of furniture. My mother similar textiles, but she also designed wallpapers, carpets, ceramics. but I mean more in production, and I mean that's the really exciting thing with the foundation is
you've got a huge scope as well, haven't you? Huge scope,
but it means finding the right licensees, the right companies, and that is the process which we've been very busy with behind the scenes, really, right from the beginning. We inherited some good, mostly smaller collaborations from my parents, some good ones. But we've been talking to and developing relationships with some new licensees, and we've got some very exciting new collaborations, which will be announced in the next couple of years, with both my parents' work, perhaps particularly my father's, but finding the right companies.
Well, I think that's very parallel to me trying to actually find a manufacturer to actually make something that I've designed.
Yes.
And that relationship that you touched on is so important.
It is.
I mean, I think in the world there's so much of just send a CAD model off and then 10,000 have arrived on a container 3 months later. There's so much of that with no understanding of how things are actually properly made and no proper liaison with people.
Yeah. And for us, I mean, a key thing that I realized right from the beginning is we needed to define what we mean by authenticity. And that, I mean, we developed policies very early on in discussions with both academics and people in the industry, which provide guidelines for ourselves and our licensees. And they're continually being refined, and it's a continual learning process. There's sort of philosophical issues behind it, but also very practical ones. Working with licensees to produce something which is aesthetically and in relation to my father's work, structurally true to the original design.
Yeah.
But which inevitably involves using different materials
and different machines and technologies,
techniques,
isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is a constant, fascinating challenge. And I mean, I'm very lucky.
Imagine.
We have a technician, Amos Marchant, who's a really important consultant.
Who I need to butt in and say I went to college with him.
Yes, and he remembers you well. Yeah, and that's a sort of key person that we work with outside of the foundation, and with textiles, actually, somebody within the foundation has a textile background. I've learned a huge amount, and the more I've worked with my parents' work, the more I've appreciated it. Something that I'm afraid I didn't really think about while they were alive.
I don't think you do, though, do you? I mean, you take it for granted. I mean,
absolutely.
It's all around the house, isn't it? And it's just there, and why would you? Why would you take it so seriously?
I mean, was it when you started to study design, to work as a designer yourself, that you began to appreciate your father's work?
That's a very, very good question. I think I used to sort of challenge his design, actually, in my early days. I suppose, when you're young and you're at college, you're sort of experimenting with sort of you're trying to push the boundaries, aren't you? Whereas my father, I think I always thought it was a bit understated and perhaps a bit boring. But you sort of have lived with these designs, haven't you? So they sort of, to me, they get inside you. And I suppose for me as a designer, perhaps I don't think I'm trying to design like my father would. I just design things, and I think, well, that's right, and it's that rightness which has been sort of instilled in me. I think.
I mean, I would have said when I started the foundation that I didn't really know about furniture design or textile design. I hadn't studied them.
I mean, that must have been.
Why would I?
Yeah.
But what I realised is that actually I did, in a sense. I mean, I completely understood when I saw, a chair of my father's which had been, either copied or else produced in a production which actually wasn't authentic because the company hadn't really worked on authenticity. And then I saw the original piece from 1952. And I just thought, and there was this sense of recognition actually of my father,
Yeah.
of his personality.
Yeah.
You know, this quality of energy and poise and severe economy, but tremendous energy, which was just completely recognizable. And then I began to see, you know, why it was right. It was because it was using materials in a way that was thoroughly efficient and economical, creating something that was really comfortable to sit in, combining all those different requirements.
So how do you square up if a manufacturer says, look, this is a better way of doing this now?
Well, Amos and I have intense discussions, and which are very, very productive, because he obviously has the technical knowledge and the design experience, and I have the understanding of the history and the sort of philosophical thinking to produce the guidelines.
But where do you sort of draw the line? I mean, if a way of doing it is in effect obsolete, do you carry on with that way of doing it, or do you do it in the way that is now current?
Well, we have a key phrase that recurs throughout our Robin Day endorsement policy, that amendments or changes may be considered if they improve function without compromising the aesthetic.
So so the aesthetic is absolutely rigid.
I don't think I'd call it rigid, but I'd call it vital.
Yeah.
Corin, how would you answer that question about obsolete manufacturing, and how you perhaps have developed your production?
Our production has hardly changed. Cutlery is very odd, actually. It sort of produced in effect like it was done at the turn of the century, quite frankly, and not much has really changed with the way we make cutlery. And it's partly because we don't make cutlery on a very large scale compared with some much bigger cutlery manufacturers. So I think actually the technology in making the cutlery, because we have to make so many ranges and make such small volume, couldn't be changed. Right. I've always loved the idea of getting some robots in, but every time we look at the robots, it just doesn't work. So I also I have such a great small collection of cutlers. I wouldn't want to change them all for robots either. I think where things have changed is how we design things. That has changed quite a lot.
And what about materials? Is it
No, it hasn't changed. I mean,
the stainless steel is still the same.
1810 stainless steel, and that's what you make cutlery from. I mean, I really would quite embrace a change, if there was some new way of doing it. And I keep thinking, gosh, surely within my time there must be some new way of making stainless steel cutlery, because I'd like it, but I can't see at the moment there is a viable alternative to this very old-fashioned way of making cutlery.
Yes.
But obviously with other things, there are things that are more relevant in terms of making. But I do think the design has changed a bit.
In what way has the design changed?
Well, with sort of rapid prototyping and the computer, and the way you can sort of realize. I mean, you can, if you know what you're doing, you can actually could sort of design something in not many hours and have a sort of amazing visual of it as a sort of finished thing. So you can do this great trick of making something in very little time. Obviously, it's not real.
Yeah,
and you're using presumably computers and digital design, which your father didn't, I guess.
No. However, I'm modern in one way, but in the other way, I'm very, very old-fashioned in that I still go into the factory and file away my prototypes, because the computer can do me this amazing visual, which looks like I've sort of done it, but actually it's not the same and it's not right.
And you have to handle it, don't you?
You've got to handle it, and you've got to. It's those decisions that your you're making as you're making a prototype and you're filing a bit off and you think, well, I might just go a bit further with that rad. And the weight doesn't feel quite right, so I need to weld a little bit on. You can't do that on the computer.
Yeah.
So I do it the wrong way round. So I'll do a sketch and then I will make up my very, very crude, welded, filed metal prototype. And then once I've got that roughly right, then we'll start using the technology side to actually sort of rapid prototype it and define it further.
That's really interesting.
Which is the wrong way. It's not the way most people would do it.
Yeah.
And it's the same if I'm designing a stainless steel cafetiere or something. I start off on my workbench with some bits of tube, put them together, and then move on to the rapid prototype stage.
Yeah. Paula, how important are the people that you've brought into the foundation to its success?
Hugely. I mean, it's a small team and we're still a very small organisation. I mean, trustees, 4 trustees at the moment, 2 employees part-time, our business manager and our curator, archivist. We've only had employees since 2018. It really used to be me, I have to say. And it still is a lot of the time. Certainly the communication side of things, which is probably what I enjoy the most. But yes, I mean, we very, very lucky to work with, excellent people. Our archivist, Will, is, extremely skilled, wonderful new business manager, Yasmin. And also, I mean, excellent IP lawyers, which has been a very, very key part of our work. And learning about design intellectual property has been extraordinarily important and will continue to be, really, to protect the legacies. Yeah. I mean, I'm delighted to hear that doesn't seem to have been such an issue for you, and I imagine it's partly because it's always been evident to people that David Mellor's designs belong to and are looked after by David Mellor, whereas my parents' designs around the time they died, really there was nobody to look after or to speak for Robin and Lucienne Day. That's what I've stepped in to do. And
is it because it was, I mean, some of it was made in big volume as well, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. What, you mean during their lifetimes?
Yeah, huge.
My father's polypropylene chair is reputed to be the biggest selling chair of all time still. I don't know if that's true.
So perhaps that, because obviously our cutlery is much, much smaller scale. So I wonder if that's that doesn't help when people are trying to do copies.
I mean, I think, Alice, you'll probably know more, but that actually furniture, furniture copies have been and continue to be a real problem. And I mean, what I foresee is the more successful we are in licensing, particularly my father's designs, for international production and sales, and therefore the more desirable the name Robin Day is, possibly the more difficulty we'll have in that respect. But on the other hand, the more resources we'll have to combat that, which is an absolutely essential part of the work. I think that no one could ever have had an excuse for not knowing that the Provence shapes were designed by David Mellor, and that it's David Mellor, company that owns and looks.
Yeah, I wonder if it is that combination of name and shape that perhaps protects it. But it isn't something that we've had big problems with so far. No. I mean, actually, some of my products have been copied, I think, more than the cutlery. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an important part of our work, and it seems to me that you've probably been doing it without sort of having to employ lawyers. It's representing.
Well, I'm rather relieved because I've got enough on. I don't want to be employing lawyers.
No. But, design legacies, I mean, they're part, as I said, they're part of the nation's cultural heritage, basically. I mean, that sounds very grand, but it's true. So I think we're both looking after, on behalf of the nation, really, part of the artistic heritage of the 20th century.
And have you had instances where you've seen one of your father's chairs on the market and thought, what on earth's that doing there?
Absolutely.
Gosh.
Happens all the time.
All the time?
Well, I mean, it happens quite often.
Yeah.
I mean, I am aware. I said we've now, after 10 years' work, more or less cleared most copies, but they pop up.
That's what I was thinking. You get rid of one, and it's like a weed growing, and another one pops up. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Gosh, what a world.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's one of the biggest challenges of looking after the legacy of your parents' work?
I think it is a big challenge. I think getting the designs into excellent, authentic licensed production, is equally important. I think both of those are what David Mellor, your family, your company have been doing effectively. We've had to kind of do those things almost from scratch.
Yes.
Since I set up the foundation in
Which must have
2010.
been a huge learning curve.
Huge.
I mean,
huge.
All that side of it, all the legal side of it.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've had different challenges, Corin?
Yeah, I've also got I've got 50 staff, and I have to make the business viable.
Yes.
So I've got the whole sort of money side of it to sort of bear in mind, that the whole place actually works, because if I can't make the whole place work, then all the designs are not I'm not protecting everything, am I? I mean, if we're not viable, then it doesn't work. So I've always got that side of it, which is interesting. I mean, I suppose I quite like that side of it, but I'm not a finance expert.
And you have how many employees?
We've got about 50 at the moment.
Yeah. We have 2 part-time employees.
I wish I had 2.
But on the other hand, as a charity, we have governance responsibilities.
Yes.
And of course, we do lots of other work other than licensed designs. I mean, we work with, we collaborate on exhibitions, on publications.
Because there's the education side of it,
and
we
give awards. I mean, we work in design education and we do awards. And there is much, much more we'd love to be able to do in that respect when our income increases. So, I too, funnily enough, I'm running a business, because most charities are businesses as well. And royalties are certainly a very important part of the income.
Yes. I mean, that's another world, isn't it? Which I know little about from my mother's work, because that's all sort of royalty based.
Right.
How does that work?
Of course, it hadn't occurred to me that you don't work with royalties, but you don't, because you sell all the designs.
No.
Okay. I mean,
I know nothing about that world.
Yes. I mean, how does it work? And the other side of our work with lawyers is obviously we have royalty contracts, IP contracts, and getting really good, strong IP contracts which protect the designs and ensure that we draw an income from them. Yeah. And of course, I mean, when choosing which companies to work with, there's all sorts of things come into play. I mean, companies that have a really principled commitment and interest in an understanding of design is obviously extremely important, but so too is, that they're strong businesses, and that
yes, because there's no point sort of investing if they're going to disappear in 2 years.
That's right.
Isn't it?
And I mean, our aim is obviously, to take my parents' names out across the world. So international distribution is important, both in terms of royalty income, but also in terms of reputation. I mean, my parents were international names in their day, and their designs were sold across the world.
And do people approach you and say, "Look, we've got this piece of furniture. We would like to think about relaunching? Or do you ever find somebody that you think might be a good custodian, really, of that design?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
So you've got to know the whole field quite well, haven't you, for that?
Yes, and we've had introductions from really good friends and allies of the foundation. I mean, we're very, very lucky to have such good contacts and people who support us, and who have such huge respect for my parents. And I'm sure that's the same with you. I mean, that your whole organization will be supported by huge respect for your father and then for your work, I'm sure.
Which my parents between them built up.
Absolutely.
So I have them to thank for that.
Absolutely.
But you have to, I suppose, keep the momentum going, which is interesting.
And keep the quality.
And keep the quality.
Which,
I mean, that is the hardest thing I find, is keeping the quality.
Yeah. And there's also the question of handing it forward. I mean, I see, when you set up a charity, you're setting it up in perpetuity. So I see myself setting up an organisation which I hope will be able to continue representing and looking after my parents' legacies, beyond my time. I don't have children to do that. Do you think about that? Do you think about the future?
Vaguely. Yeah. I mean, I'm not terribly good at sort of forward planning. I just tend to sort of do what I'm doing. So I'm doing Chelsea Flower Show this week, and then next week I'm off to, So, but I do have two sons who are sort of definitely going in that direction.
Right.
Who are interested in both interested in design. So I sort of hope that it will form its own course. But I'm sort of intending to carry on for a little while.
Yeah.
I think before we finish our conversation, it would be really lovely to hear what the joys are of your roles within the foundation and the business.
Yeah, I think I quite like the variation, actually. I quite like this wearing lots of different hats. Yeah. I suppose I actually get quite a big buzz when I go somewhere. Say I go off to California and someone says, "Oh, David Mellor, amazing, David Mellor," and you think, well, actually, yeah, perhaps what we are doing is good. I love that. Yeah. I love that, and equally, I like talking to people in the shop. I mean, this weekend I was talking to some architects who had come up from the Midlands, and it's just nice knowing that there is a sort of a legacy there.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel proud of it, I think.
Yeah. I think the joy of learning about my parents' work and appreciating it, communicating my parents' work, which I find fascinating, and then bringing my parents' work back to life. Because, we've created a digital archive. There's this great archive resource. And then we work with companies and it actually comes back into production. It actually comes back to life. And people are not just seeing it in books and exhibitions, they're using it, they're sitting in it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is nice, isn't it? I mean, that is exactly the same feeling I have when one of my designs is sort of actually in our shops, in the window. You think, oh, I've achieved it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful.
I think there's nothing better than that feeling.
No, well, I mean,
it's absolutely. Corin, Paula, thank you so much for being here today and for being part of Designer's Voice. When this series was first conceived, this is the conversation that I wanted to listen to the most, and it absolutely did not disappoint. So thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise and an insight into all of your work and your time. Thank you so much.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks, Alice.
It absolutely has. And really enjoyed it.